Hi everyone, this is a video that hopefully will explain how to answer the somatotypes level marks question in your exam. The first thing we need to do is just look at what somatotypes actually are and make sure that you're able to identify three different types. As you can see from the screen, the three types are endomorph, ectomorph, and mesomorph. To keep it nice and simple in your head, you just need to remember that endomorphs are the fat people, ectomorphs are the skinny people, and mesomorphs, if you remember, the M is for muscular. So once you've been able to identify them, the next thing to do is to be able to link key sports which are well suited to each body type. As we spoke about in class, good examples to use for each are long distance runners and high jumpers are good examples of ectomorphs. As you can see from the pictures, they're quite thin, they're not carrying very much fat or muscle, and that would be useful in those events. Good examples for endomorphs are sumo wrestlers, right at the most extreme kind of scale of body type, but also shot put throwers, so they're carrying a lot of weight in their events. Finally, you've got examples of mesomorphs, so they're muscular athletes, and we've got 100-meter sprinters who tend to be very, very muscular, but also boxers and maybe middleweight or heavyweight boxers who are carrying that extra muscle. There are lots of other examples you can use, but these tend to be the best ones to go with, I think. Now, once you've been able to link the sports, the next thing to do is identify key features of each body type. We went through this in class, and one of the ways to do that is just to break up the body. So rather than describing it as a whole, so just thinking fat, for instance, for endomorphs, you need to be able to make 3 or 4 different comments. So thinking about things like the shoulders, the arms, the waist, and the hips. So, for example, high content of fat, wide hips, relatively narrow shoulders. So if you think about that, that body shape, which is a pear-shaped, like that, it's relatively narrow. If you saw a sumo wrestler, you wouldn't think they had, the first thing you'd think wouldn't be, oh, they've got really narrow shoulders, but it's relative to the hips, much wider here than it is up here. Other things you can comment on, so the fat around the middle of the midriff, so the stomach area, tends to be carrying a lot of weight there, but also the thighs and the arms. And as we looked at earlier, some examples, shot put throwers, sumo wrestlers, plus also some particular positions in certain games like rugby. So the front row players, the players that play in the scrum, those would also be endomorphs. Ectomorphs, same process. Take a moment to think, what are the key features for that? And again, break up the body into different sections. An overall statement would be very thin and lean, usually tall, but not always. So for instance, some long distance runners tend to be a bit smaller, so I tend to disregard that one and just focus on key features of the body. Not much fat, but also not very much muscle. And those are 2 separate comments worth 2 separate marks. Same thing for this, so narrow shoulders, narrow hips, narrow chest, all would be separate marks in the exam. Long arms and long legs, so even for someone that's fairly small, relatively their arms and legs would be quite long. Not my favorite comment to use, so maybe if you disregard that one. And again, examples of athletes might be endurance athletes, so marathon runners. Tennis players tend to be quite long and lean, high jumpers and long jumpers. Next one, the mesomorphs. So again, think of the M. Rather than just muscular, let's try and pick out particular areas of the body. Large muscle content. You could say, comment on the muscular arms, muscular legs, broad shoulders with a thin waist. So if you think of this wedge shape, the waist here is relatively thin compared to these big shoulders up at the top. Narrow hips, wedge-shaped body, and examples are weightlifters and sprinters, but also lots of games players. So if you think of Cristiano Ronaldo, he'd be your perfect mesomorph, carrying lots of muscle, but also performers like LeBron James in basketball, and actually lots of players in rugby as well. But these are probably the best examples to go with, along with, as we saw earlier, boxers like Anthony Joshua would be a good example. Once you've been able to do that, this is just a summary. Just take a moment to read this through. So 3 or 4 key features for each body type. You then have to link that in to the particular benefits that each individual would feel in their sport from being that particular body type. So an endomorph, lots of excess weight, how does that help? Well, they're going to be very heavy. In a sport like sumo wrestling, that's going to make them very hard to move and push out of the way, but equally they're going to be very strong with a lot of force, so they're going to be feeling the advantage of that weight. An ectomorph, so again, if you think of a long distance runner, the fact that they're very thin, light, that would help them in terms of stamina, being light on their feet, not carrying any excess weight, so very efficient running over a longer distance. Finally, mesomorphs, so depending on what your example is, key thing is for the muscular individuals, you can link that into lots of different fitness components. So they're likely to be strong, they're likely to be powerful, they're likely to be have good speed. All of those things you could then link into sporting examples from whichever sport you choose to select. This is then the key bit that we looked at the end of the lesson. So the level marks question, you need to structure your answer into 3 clear sections, AO1, AO2, and AO3. Before you write anything down though, it's always good practice to bug the question. So if you break that bug in the question down, first one, the B, box, the command word, that's what's telling you what you need to do with the question. Once you've done that, you then look for the key information or the key content in the question. So as soon as you see this, you know it's going to be a somatotype question, and then you're looking for which sport they're trying to link it into. In this case, it's a basketball player. So is John, who's very tall and thin, well suited to basketball? This is how you might structure your answer once you get to writing it. So you identify the knowledge that you need to show here. In this case, it's saying that John is likely to be a somatotype, and then add in 1 or 2 key features on top of what they've already said in the question. So they've said he's tall and thin. What else can you say? You could say likely to have narrow hips, narrow shoulders, not carrying very much excess weight. Second part of your answer is where you link and apply the knowledge that you have on the topic to the sport of basketball. Try and make a couple of positive links. So basketball is often played by ectomorphs, which John is, and then you can link it into things like collecting rebounds, jumping up to the basket for a layup, lots of different examples. So you only need a couple, but make sure it's a positive example that you give. Once you've done that, you then get into the section where the bulk of the marks are awarded, where you have to actually answer the question and evaluate whether or not it would be a suitable sport for this body type. Potential content that you could include, just stating that being an ectomorph would certainly be a benefit, and adding in any examples that you haven't given in AO2. What other factors are involved in the success? So the fact that John may or may not be skillful in that sport. If he is, that would then help, but he might not be, in which case it might not be an appropriate sport for him. Just because he is tall doesn't mean he's going to be good at basketball. What else can you say? Well, the benefits of other somatotypes. So basketball players are often quite strong, so having an element of being a mesomorph would also help John. Other things, other nice simple things you can say. John might not like basketball, therefore, even though he's well suited to it in terms of his physique, it might not be suitable. He might just not be very good at it. There might be other sports that he might enjoy more. So as an ectomorph, what's the go-to sport that you could use as an alternative? Long distance running. That might be a better sport for John, or high jump, for example. That would be how to structure your answer to ensure that you're getting a good stack of marks in the level mark question. This is what the actual mark scheme would look like for that sort of question. Pause this and just take a moment to go through some of the key content there. And then what I'd like you to do is try and attempt one of the next couple of questions in your books and then bring it into the next lesson. So remember the process. If you write this down in your books now, then you can follow up with your answer and it's very clear what you need to do. This next slide just breaks down how you should structure it, but remember the first thing you should be doing is bug in the question. Please show that in your books. And finally, that's the mark scheme for it. If you want to mark it yourself, just to give you an idea, remember, while it's judged as an overall answer, this section is worth approximately 1 mark. AO2 is worth approximately 2 marks. And then AO3 is worth approximately 3 marks, and that will give you 6 marks in total. This is another question, the same structure, and again, you can just work it through using exactly the same structure as you had before, this time looking at a muscular athlete and trying to link that into a sport such as football. Okay, please bring this work in with you at the start of next half term and we can have a review of it. Okay, all the best, take care.